Hey there YouTube, this is Vargas XX78, back here with a Tales from the Vargas Vault video. It's actually been a good while since I've recorded a Tales video. If I remember correctly, the last Tales from the Vargas Vault video I recorded was back 2 years ago, at least, when I was recording my Superman comic book collection in honor of Superman's 75th anniversary, and that's a good 2 years ago. But recently on the Vargas Vault Facebook page, which I'll put a link on this video, I was talking about the Castlevania games in my collection. I just very briefly posted a quick review of each one of the Castlevania games in my collection, and a Vargas score for each one of them. The reason I did that is because I was listening to a podcast, a Templo del Tiempo podcast done by the people that work in Club Nintendo magazine, and they were talking about Hideo Kojima leaving Konami, which was big news a couple of weeks ago. He stated that after Metal Gear Solid 5, he would leave Konami, and that would be the end of his involvement with the Metal Gear series, which unfortunately kind of leaves Silent Hills in limbo because he was going to work on that with Guillermo del Toro. So that game, unfortunately, I don't know what's going to happen with that game. But in said podcast, they were talking about their reactions to that. They were talking about how Konami is in a really, really bad state, just like Capcom. They've made a bunch of bad decisions, and Konami especially has killed a lot of their franchises, and they also reminisced about how awesome Konami was back on the NES and the Super Nintendo, and they were talking about all the awesome franchises that they provided all gamers. But one franchise in particular, and it's what inspired those reviews, was Castlevania. So, for my YouTube viewers, because I wrote those reviews in Spanish, for my YouTube viewers, I wanted to record this Tales video to basically share with you guys my Castlevania collection. It's not a perfect collection, unfortunately. I am missing 5 games that I want to get, but this is my humble Castlevania collection. I'm very proud of my Castlevania collection, actually, because I really, really love the series. I love the way that they combine, all these mythological creatures and horror elements into this game. And they've experimented with this series, and some have been good, some have been bad. But all in all, they've kept constantly a great level of good music. The soundtrack in any Castlevania is awesome. The setting in the Castlevania games is amazing. Fighting all these monsters and the bosses is always cool. The only thing that has, been hit or miss is probably the camera, probably the game control, but I just wanted to go over each one of my Castlevania games. I'll try to keep this short, not as short as my Facebook reviews, but we'll go over each one of them, and I hope you guys enjoy. So, first off, I wanted to, of course, talk about the game that started the series on the NES, and this is my copy of Castlevania 1. Classic game. If I'm honest with you guys, the Castlevania trilogy on the NES, as much as I love it, I haven't been able to beat any one of the games. It's been at least 20, 30 years since these games released, and I have yet to be able to beat them. I love playing them. I can still pop any Castlevania game on its appropriate console. I'll enjoy it. I'll lose, but I still enjoy it. In all honesty, my brother, the second brother in our family, he was a master at Castlevanias and Mega Mans. He would beat any one of the games that released, but I still enjoyed them. And this one was so cool. Like I said, it mixes mythological creatures. It mixes horror elements. It has, Medusas and Frankensteins and werewolves and zombies and ghouls. Great series. The music in this is amazing. The graphics, for the NES were mind-blowing. it's such a good game, and it showed what Konami, could give gamers. No, Konami on the NES was, for the most part, a brand of quality, just like Capcom. You could pick up a Capcom or a Konami game, and you knew you were getting good stuff. The second game in the franchise is probably one that most people know about, if anyone is a fan of the Angry Video Game Nerd, and that's Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. Much like The Legend of Zelda 2, Link's Adventure, Konami wanted to experiment on the formula that they did on the first Castlevania, and it's the beginning of the video games. They could do that. They could experiment, see what works, see what doesn't, give people, try to give people something fresh. And this one, it had the same graphical look as the first one, but it had night and day switching. The bad guys on the nighttime would be more powerful, and in the daytime you can go into towns and talk to people, get items, and so on. The only thing that I feel this one had issues with is that you had to take some very interesting leaps of faith to progress on the game, and unless you read Nintendo Power or saw Nintendo Mania or talked to someone that beat the game, there wasn't really any means to figure stuff out. That's, I think, the reason why this one was not as accepted as the first one. It just had some very interesting logical leaps that you had no way of knowing unless you spoke to every single character. But I don't think it's a bad game. It's difficult, yes, it is a difficult game, as is any Castlevania game in the series. But it's not a bad game. The music is still cool, and again, the graphics are pretty amazing. The last of the Castlevania NES trilogy games is definitely the better one. This takes elements from Castlevania 2, improves elements from Castlevania the original one, and just makes a masterpiece on the NES, and that's Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. You can play as a Belmont. I unfortunately forgot which one he is, but it might be Trevor Belmont? I think it's Trevor. But you can also play it as a thief, as a magician girl, and as Alucard, who would later have his own amazing game on the PlayStation 1. But this ramped up the difficulty. It did away with these complicated leaps of logic that Castlevania 2 had. It's very, very hard. It is a punishing game, but again, like any Castlevania game, the music is amazing, the graphics are beautiful. It's just I think it's the best game of the Castlevania trilogy on the NES. Again, just shows how good Konami got at making Castlevania games. And they perfected that even more when they released their Castlevania on the Super Nintendo with Super Castlevania 4, which features the return of Simon Belmont. Now, I don't know if this was intended to be an update of the first one, but it improves so many elements. You no longer get to use alternate characters, it's just Simon. But the thing that blew me away with this one, and this is a game that I actually have been able to beat, is that you can control the whip. You can control the whip in any direction. The graphics were way improved. The play control was improved. The music was still badass. This is an amazing Castlevania game on the Super Nintendo. It's only one of two that released on the Super Nintendo. But it's a beautiful game, and on the Super Nintendo, again, only one of two, but this is the better one, I think, that released. It's just amazing. It's a great game. If you can download it on the Virtual Console, I would definitely recommend it because it's so freaking good. Now, Konami also had some mobile games, and the first one I have for the Game Boy is Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge. I don't have the first one. I don't have Castlevania Adventure, but this is Castlevania 2, and I haven't been able to find the first Castlevania on the Game Boy, but this one is pretty good. It's a very limited version of Castlevania. It doesn't have the detailed backgrounds or the detailed graphics. Again, it's the Game Boy, but for what it is, it's still pretty good. It's also very difficult. The music, on the Game Boy is also very limited, but it's still pretty amazing. The other one that they released, the third one that they released on the Game Boy, is Castlevania Legends. This is the first Castlevania game that has a female protagonist. This is Sonia Belmont. And it also has Alucard. They actually hint at a possible romance between Sonia Belmont and Alucard. And which would strengthen the Belmont bloodline. Now, this is a way better game than this. This perfected a lot of elements in the Game Boy. It was a more detailed game. It was a much deeper game. It's funny how Konami released trilogies in each, with the exception of the Super Nintendo, they, for the most part, released trilogies in each console that Castlevania appeared. And I think out of the three, this is the best one, definitely. The interesting thing about this one is that it got retconned. This was supposed to be the first Castlevania game. In the storyline, Sonia and Alucard had a child, who I think is Simon, or it might be Trevor, I don't remember. And again, he was the more powerful one because he had the Belmont and the Alucard blood in him. So this was supposed to be the first one, but when Iga took control of the Castlevania series, he kind of retconned this out. But it's still an amazing game. I really, really love this game, and again, I think it's the better one of the Game Boy Trilogy games. After the Super Nintendo, they released one more game, which I'll talk about at the end. But Konami didn't release any other Castlevania games on the Super. They made the jump to the 64 with Castlevania. Also known as Castlevania 64, even though it doesn't have any of the 64 on the logo or on the box. A lot of people don't like this Castlevania game. They think that maybe the 3D graphics don't work. I do admit that it has camera issues. But honestly, it has a pretty good story. The story with Malice, I think, is really cool. The intro on this, that has Malice playing the violin, I think that melody is so cool. It's so awesome. Like I said, Castlevania, if there's one thing that, is Castlevania's signature, is the music. I have yet to hear a Castlevania game that has bad music. The music in this is beautiful in any Castlevania game. So I don't think this is a bad game. Again, the camera is an issue, but the play control is cool. You can, for the first time in 3D, you can visit and explore Castlevania itself, so it's not that bad. But Konami, realizing the issues that a lot of people had with the first Castlevania in the 64, released Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Now, this is a massive game because it has within the cartridge a prequel to Castlevania 64. You control this werewolf that has to save his sister. He's a part of a werewolf clan, and he has to save his sister from another werewolf that has destroyed his village, because he intends to use the sister to revive Dracula. So of course the werewolf has to go. Once you beat that part, you have a little mini game segment, and then you continue the events of Castlevania 64. But it has all those three storylines in a single cartridge. It used the expansion pack, so it greatly cleaned up the graphics. They made some modifications to the play control. They tried to do the best they could with the camera. It still has issues, but it's not as bad as the 64 one, as the first 64. So really, if you had to choose between one of two, I would definitely recommend this one, because it's a more complete version. This is definitely the one I would recommend. Again, a lot of people still say that they hate the Castlevania 64 entries, but honestly, I really enjoyed these. Obviously, this is the superior version, the one I would definitely recommend, but I don't hate this Castlevania 64 entry. It's really, really cool. And unfortunately, these are the only two games that released for Castlevania on the 64. Where they really shone was the next generation of portable games. The first one in the Game Boy Advance trilogy is Castlevania Circle of the Moon. This was an improved version of what you saw on Super Castlevania 4. The graphics were beautiful, the sprites were really detailed. Again, the music was amazing. The only thing that this game, in my opinion, has is that if you played it on the original Game Boy Advance, it was really, really dark. If you played it on the SP or on the Super Game Boy, I'm sorry, not the Super Game Boy, the Game Boy Player on the GameCube, it wasn't that bad. But if you played this game on the original Game Boy Advance, it was dark and it really made it difficult to play. But other than that detail, it was great. Great, great Castlevania game. They followed up with another game, which is Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. Great, great game. It improved everything from the original one. These games, well, the term started off with Symphony of the Night, but this is full-on Metroidvania. What that means is that it had Castlevania elements, but like Metroid, you had to explore all of Castlevania and unlock each one of the rooms so that you can get 100% in the castle. This again improved everything. It was a lot more clearer if you played it on the original Game Boy Advance. The character sprites were even more detailed. The music was cool. The boss battles were amped up. Great, great sequel on the Game Boy. But they perfected all of that, in my opinion, with Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. The best Game Boy Advance game, in my opinion. I have to think about it, but probably the best Castlevania game in the series. It's just so cool. You saw cameos from Alucard, from the Belmonts. You follow this character called Soma Cruz that is with his friend during an eclipse. He falls unconscious, wakes up, and he's inside Castlevania. But it's like modern times. And Soma Cruz has the ability to defeat enemies and take the powers onto himself. And the big plot reveal in the game is amazing. Opens up so many possibilities. It's just a beautiful game. I honestly think that this possibly might be my favorite game in the series. And of the Game Boy Advance trilogy, it's the best one by far. Just, it's so good. It's really, really good. And Castlevania then made the jump on the DS with a sequel to Castlevania Aria of Sorrow called Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. Following the events of Castlevania Aria, a full year after that, Soma Cruz has to deal with the consequences of the first game, and he has to, fight enter Castlevania one more time to stop this cult that's trying to resurrect Dracula. Again, has cameos and everything. The thing that they tried to do differently with this one is that with the touchscreen, you could do spells. You would draw the spell on the touchscreen, and that would create the spell. Same graphical style, a little more updated, but I would say this is my second favorite one, but it is still pretty amazing. It's a direct sequel from this one, so it does make that good, and it's one of the few times that Castlevania has done a direct sequel. This one and Castlevania and then Simon's Quest. So it's a pretty cool game. I will say it's pretty amazing. But Aria of Sorrow is still my favorite one. The second one in the Nintendo DS trilogy is Castlevania Portrait of Ruin. Much like Castlevania 64, you control two characters. One that wields the Vampire Killer and a Spellcaster. I think I honestly do think that this is a Konami's attempt to fix or update Castlevania 64 because it's very similar in the fact that you use a whip master and a spellcaster. And the thing about this one is that you enter Castlevania, but you have to enter portraits, and kind of like Mario 64. And you would enter portraits, and each portrait would be its own room, and you would do stuff. Not as cool as Dawn of Sorrow. Still a good entry, but something's missing for it to be, amazing. Now, the PSP did get a Castlevania entry, and that's Castlevania Dracula X Chronicles. There's a Castlevania game that released in Japan called Castlevania Rondo of Blood. That didn't actually release here in America. There was a port of it on the Super Nintendo called Castlevania Dracula X, but a lot of people say that that's a butchered version of that series. So for the PSP, they released this one. This one has an updated. It's a graphical update to Rondo of Blood, but you can also play it in the original, 16-bit style, and you can also unlock Castlevania Symphony of the Night because the events of Rondo of Blood happened before Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So on the PSP, you can get both. So that's pretty cool because I don't own Symphony of the Night. Now for the PlayStation 2, Konami once again tried to make an entry for the 3D graphical style. On the portables they had their Metroidvanias. On the PlayStation 2 they tried once again their hand on 3D platforming and action games. The first one is the new first entry in the series. This is supposedly the origin of the Belmont clan and the Vampire Killer, and this is Castlevania Lament of Innocence. I loved this game when it came out. The graphical style was amazing. The art style was pretty cool. The way that you would use the powers, the whip, once again the music. It's just an amazing game, I thought. You use a Leon Belmont, which is now the first Belmont that fights, goes into Castlevania and fights vampires. They also give an origin to Dracula. So I thought it was a pretty cool game. And they followed up with a sequel, not to that one, but they followed up with another game in the series called Castlevania Curse of Darkness. Now this is it's sort of a sequel to Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. Because you're this beast forger that worked for Dracula during that game. He retired and someone wants to bring Dracula back before the 100 years are up. So he has to enter Castlevania, and you meet up with Trevor, who's the Belmont in Castlevania 3. So it increases the graphical style. You don't, until you unlock Trevor, you don't actually use a whip. But the thing about this one is that you can forge monsters to help you out. You would attack them with a sword, and then you might have some goblins or some demons throwing missiles, or you could summon a big armored guy to smash, enemies. I thought this was a much better improvement on Lament of Innocence, at least graphically, and I enjoyed this one a lot. Now, Iga, for the Wii, wanted to try out something new, and a lot of people didn't like it, but that's Castlevania Judgment. Iga, wanting to stay a little bit away from the Metroidvania formula, decided to do a fighter. This is a Castlevania fighter. You would use characters from different games. What made this one interesting is that the character designs were done by the artist that did Death Note, so that was meant to be a pull, even though they looked too different from their original incarnations. It's not a bad fighter, honestly. The control style does get some getting used to, but I don't think it's a bad fighter. Graphically, it's beautiful. Once again, the music is amazing. You can use a GameCube controller, so you know that if you want to wiggle the Wiimote, that's an alternative. And it has a small roster, but it has memorable characters. I think the reason this one was not as accepted is because people didn't want a fighter. They wanted a legit Castlevania entry on the Wii, and this is what they got. Again, I don't hate this one. I'm actually very happy to have it in my collection. I will admit, it would have been awesome to see a Castlevania game on the Wii because you know you could use the Wiimote like the whip and go like like the Legend of Zelda, Skyward Sword, or Twilight Princess. That would have been awesome, I will admit. But all in all, I don't think it's such a despised game. It's not that bad, honestly. Konami got rid of Iga, unfortunately, because sales of Castlevania games were not what they wanted. Even though it has a huge following, the sales numbers didn't satisfy Konami. So they decided to reboot the whole franchise, give control to the game to the Metal Gear team, and they released Castlevania Lords of Shadow. This is a complete reboot to the Castlevania series. They got rid of every single game that came before, started off the series fresh. Graphically, it is a beautiful game, I will admit. The music, again, like most Castlevania games, like all Castlevania games, is amazing. But for this one, Konami did some very weird decisions. They took too many elements from God of War. They took too many elements from Shadow of the Colossus, and they integrated those elements into this, and they took away from the feeling of Castlevania. This was a good action game, but this is not a good Castlevania game. It's just too separate from what Castlevania should be, I think. It's not a bad game by any sense of the word, but it doesn't feel like a Castlevania game. Again, I don't regret owning this. I actually do want to get the sequel, because it does set up a very interesting thing for the Valmonts on this one. But it doesn't feel like Castlevania, unfortunately. So those are the 18 games that I own for the Castlevania series in my collection. The ones that I'm missing that I was talking about is I would like to own Castlevania Dracula X, which I mentioned came out on the Super Nintendo. That's an adaptation of Rondo of Blood. A lot of people say that that's a butchered adaptation from Rondo of Blood. They took away too many things, and the play control is not there. Actually, I do remember we rented that game, and my brother got as far as Castlevania. I'm sorry, got as far as Dracula, and he couldn't beat it because there was this point where you had to pass these pillars, and if Dracula hit you, you would fall back and die. And he tried and he tried and he tried, and he could not beat it. But for the collection, I would love to own Dracula X. You can download it on the Virtual Console. So I am thinking of doing that because I've never seen Castlevania Dracula X in the wild ever. That's one of the games I've never seen. Even if I would see it at an expensive price, I would probably buy it, but I've never seen it on the wild. The other Castlevania game that I'm missing, like I mentioned, is Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation 1. I've never seen that game on the wild, and I don't want to buy it on eBay or stuff like that. But I would like to own it. Even though you can unlock it on Dracula X Chronicles, I would like to own a copy of Symphony of the Night, which started the Metroidvania series. The other game that I'm missing is Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. That's the last game on the DS trilogy. Much like Aria of Sorrow, you play as a female character, which is the second female character to be controlled in the Castlevania series. She's not a Belmont, but she has a tattoo which allows her to absorb the powers of defeated enemies and level up, much like Soma Cruz. And that's one I've seen. And honestly, that's my own damn fault for not owning. Because when it came out, was a time where I didn't have that much money. So I was like, I'm going to wait for a price drop. I'm going to wait for it to drop. it finally dropped and then it sold out. I couldn't find a copy of the game. Only once I've seen it used at a GameStop, but I didn't have any money. So one week I went back to that same GameStop and they sold it. So I haven't seen any copies of Order of Ecclesia. The last two that I need to get is Castlevania Lords of Shadow on the 3DS. Again, not a big fan of the reboot, but that 3DS game looks interesting. And of course, Lords of Shadow 2 on the PlayStation 3. Only interested in getting that because of the setup and the cliffhanger ending in Lords of Shadow 1. Because they give a whole different origin to Dracula that seems interesting for the sequel. So those are the 5 games that I'm missing to complete my Castlevania collection. So hopefully somewhere down the line I'll be able to add those 5 games, into the collection and complete my Castlevania series. But that's my Castlevania series. It's an amazing series. It honestly bums me out that the reboot games didn't do as well to merit more entries. Konami has completely effed up the Castlevania series, and it looks like they've dropped it. They've dropped Castlevania, and that's a damn shame because it's a good series. It's one of the best series that originated from the NES and had entries for the most part in all the major consoles. And it's a shame to see such an amazing series fade away into nothingness because of greed and corporate decisions and stuff like that. But if you can get any one of the games in this series, I would recommend it. Each one of the games has some things that a lot of people don't like, but honestly, in my opinion, each one of these games is amazing in its own way. Even ones that people say are god awful, I don't think they're god awful. I think they're just different, and it's games that are trying something new, so it doesn't stale the series, which is something that for the most part Konami tried to do and then just forgot about and made some really really dumb decisions. But that's why Konami is in the monetary problems that it is right now, and they used to offer so many good games, and I'm still hoping somewhere down the line to see a Zone of the Enders game, which is something that Hideo Kojima worked on. It was amazing, and we'll see. Hopefully, Konami will come to its senses, or Konami will just, they'll go out of business, and then someone else will buy the rights to Castlevania and will bring that series back. And bring it back to its awesome glory. So, we can hope that could happen. But just wanted to share that with you guys. I hope you enjoyed this look back at the Castlevania series and the games in my collection. Like always, if you can leave a comment, thumbs up. I haven't played the Genesis game, so I know very little about that. That's why I didn't mention it. But if you think that's a good game, and I'd probably somehow give it a try. But like always, thanks so much for watching the vids. I hope to make another Tales video soon. But till then, thank you for watching this, and this is Vargas XX78 signing out.